David Carter looked into the grimy bathroom mirror of Apex Retail Store number 147. The man staring back was almost unrecognizable: faded jeans instead of tailored slacks, a cheap polo shirt instead of a custom suit, and 3 days of stubble where a clean-shaven face usually resided. His normally slicked-back hair now fell loosely across his forehead, and instead of Italian leather shoes, he wore basic sneakers that already hurt after just one shift. This was exactly what he wanted: total anonymity. "Hey, new guy. Break's over." The sharp voice from outside made David jump. That was Kelly, the floor supervisor who had been riding him since day one. "Coming," he called back, splashing water on his face one last time. David Carter, the 42-year-old CEO of Apex Retail, was now just Dave, a new sales associate making $113.75 per hour. None of the employees knew his true identity. As far as they were concerned, he was just another middle-aged man who had fallen on hard times. The idea had come to him during a board meeting when quarterly reports showed an increase in customer complaints and employee turnover. Instead of the typical corporate solutions proposed by the executives, like more training videos or layoffs, David suggested an undercover operation. The board had laughed, but that night he set the plan in motion. Now, 3 days into his assignment at one of the worst-performing stores in the Midwest, he hurried out to the sales floor where Kelly stood with her arms crossed. "You're on electronics today," she said, not making eye contact. Derek called in sick. "Don't mess with the inventory system, just scan items and call for manager approval on anything over $200. Think you can handle that?" "Yes, ma'am," David replied, swallowing his pride. As he made his way to the electronics department, David observed the store with new eyes: flickering fluorescent lights, dusty shelves, and signs advertising sales from 2 weeks ago. A customer stood impatiently at the unstaffed customer service desk, repeatedly checking her watch. In electronics, a line had formed at the register. A teenager in an Apex vest was trying to help 3 customers simultaneously. When he saw David, he exclaimed, "Hey, you're the new guy, right? Can you handle the register while I finish with these customers?" David nodded, stepping behind the counter. His training had been a rushed 45-minute video followed by Kelly handing him a lanyard and warning him not to screw up. As his lunch break arrived, David felt exhausted. He slumped into a chair in the break room, unwrapping his sandwich. "First week's the hardest," a voice said. David looked up to see a woman in her 50s settling at the table across from him. Her name tag read Ellen. "I'm Dave," he said, extending his hand. 12 years of service," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "You look like you've had better jobs before." David tensed. "What makes you say that?" "The way you talk to customers, like they're actual people, not interruptions," she laughed. "Don't worry, I won't blow your cover, Mr. Mystery Man. I'm just trying to pay bills like everyone else. Aren't we all?" David replied cautiously. "Watch out for Thomas," Ellen warned. "The warehouse guy. He acts like he runs the place." David nodded, remembering the man who had been watching him earlier. As the days passed, David settled into a routine. One day, while he was working, a piercing alarm blared through the store: code yellow in electronics. All managers to electronics immediately. A crowd had gathered near the electronics counter, where the store manager, Patricia, stood with Kelly, Thomas, and 2 security guards. "What's going on?" David asked Sam, who hovered at the edge of the group. "Inventory check showed we're missing stuff, high-end stuff," Sam whispered. Patricia announced, 8 premium smartphones and 3 tablets are missing. Over $10,000 in merchandise. Security footage shows nothing because someone tampered with the system. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at David. "This happened on your watch. One of you knows something." The atmosphere grew tense as Thomas whispered something to Patricia. She nodded and fixed her gaze on David. "Mr. Carter, or should I say Dave? Would you open your locker for us, please?" A cold sensation spread through David's chest. "Of course, but why?" "Just do it," Patricia insisted. In the employee locker room, David felt dozens of eyes on him as he dialed his combination. The lock clicked open, and Patricia stepped forward, pulling the metal door wide. Neatly stacked on the top shelf were 3 unopened tablet boxes and a smartphone. Beneath them, partially hidden by David's jacket, was an envelope stuffed with cash. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. "That's not mine," David stammered. "Someone must have. Thomas saw you entering the inventory room multiple times today," Patricia cut him off. "The missing items were logged under your employee ID." "I didn't do this," David protested, turning to face the crowd. "I'm being set up. Your previous employment record shows extensive IT experience," Kelly interjected. "You worked in tech support for 5 years." The falsified background June had created for his cover identity was now being used against him. David could reveal his identity, but who would believe him? "Dave Carter, you're terminated effective immediately," Patricia announced loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. "Security will escort you out after you surrender your name badge and vest. The police have been called. Consider yourself lucky if we don't press charges." As a security guard stepped forward to take his badge, murmurs spread among the employees. David caught Thomas's reflection in a security mirror. The man was smiling, a cold, satisfied smile that sent chills down David's spine. Outside in the parking lot, standing alone as rain began to fall, David realized the depth of the trap he had fallen into. Back at his modest rental apartment, he peeled off his wet jacket and pulled out his personal phone. 3 missed calls from June, his executive assistant. "June," he said when she answered, "we have a problem." "I know," she replied, her voice tense. "Someone leaked to the press that you're working undercover. I have calls from 3 reporters asking for comment." "It's worse than that," David said. "I've been fired, accused of stealing merchandise." "That's impossible. Someone planted evidence in your locker. I need you to pull everything we have on a warehouse employee named Thomas. No last name yet, but he started at store number 147 about 3 months ago. On it. What about the board? Don't tell them anything until I know what we're dealing with. If this hits the news, the CEO of Apex accused of stealing from his own company, the stock will tank. Give me 48 hours. David opened his laptop and began his investigation. He still had access to the company's main database through his executive credentials. If someone at store number 147 had recognized him, there had to be a connection he was missing. For hours he searched, cross-referencing employee records and scrolling through personnel files and old reports. The answer came at 3 a.m. when fatigue nearly overcame him. Thomas wasn't Thomas at all. The grainy employee photo from the warehouse workers file didn't match any Thomas in Apex's employment history. But when David ran it through an aging filter, the facial recognition software found a match. Theodore Harmon, former regional operations manager, terminated 8 years ago. David whispered, "Theodore Harmon." Memories flooded back. Harmon had been caught in a kickback scheme, costing the company millions. David had personally led the investigation and fired Harmon despite his protests of innocence. He then discovered that Harmon had assumed his dead nephew's identity to get hired but would have needed inside help at corporate. Digging deeper, David looked at system access logs. Who had approved Harmon's hiring? As dawn broke, David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You took everything from me once. Now I'll return the favor. Find Harmon now," David texted June. The real fight was just beginning. Police had taken Victor into custody, and David had spent the afternoon with the company's PR team crafting a statement about the attempted corporate sabotage. But Theodore Harmon remained at large, and store number 147 had been closed for the day as investigators combed through evidence. That evening, as they reviewed evidence in his office, June said, "We still need something more. It feels too convenient that Victor and Harmon's plan fell apart so quickly." David nodded. "Victor's too smart for this. He knows our security protocols better than anyone." "We caught them red-handed," June insisted. "Yes, but it feels like they wanted to get caught." As they dug deeper, a disturbing pattern emerged. Eleanor Wilson, the board chair, had made several trips to cities where Maxwell Electronics had offices, always under the guise of personal travel. "You think the board chair is involved?" June whispered, glancing toward the door. "I think we need to look deeper into Eleanor's financial records." Soon, a call came from Diane. "Mr. Carter, I found something while cleaning out Kelly's desk, a thumb drive hidden in a hollowed-out marker." 30 minutes later, Diane arrived at headquarters with the drive. The files confirmed David's worst fears, a secret plan to sell Apex Retail to Maxwell Electronics at a fraction of its market value, enriching a select group of board members while devastating employees and shareholders. The theft scandal was just a distraction, David realized. They needed me out of the way before the next board meeting. As the board meeting approached, David worked through the night, building an airtight case with the new evidence. By dawn, he had crafted a presentation that exposed the entire conspiracy, not just Victor and Harmon's frame-up but Eleanor's master plan to sell out the company. When the board members began arriving for the emergency meeting, David stationed security guards at all exits. Eleanor entered last, her face a mask of sympathetic concern. "David, I'm so glad you've recovered from yesterday's ordeal," she said smoothly. "We've added a discussion of Victor's replacement to today's agenda." "I've adjusted the agenda as well," David replied calmly. "We'll be discussing a different kind of replacement." Eleanor's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. Once all members were seated, David began his presentation, methodically laying out the evidence, the secret merger plans, Eleanor's connections to Maxwell, the coordinated effort to remove him through scandal. "This isn't just corporate espionage," he concluded. "It's a conspiracy and betrayal of fiduciary duty." Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "You can't prove any of this. It's your word against mine." Just then, a new voice from the doorway interrupted. "He can prove it all." Theodore Harmon stepped into the boardroom, flanked by federal agents. "Mr. Harmon has been very cooperative," the lead agent said. "In exchange for leniency, he's provided recorded conversations between himself, Mr. Hendricks, and you, Ms. Wilson." Eleanor's face went ashen as the evidence mounted against her. When security stepped forward to apprehend her, David turned to the shell-shocked board members. "There will be a full investigation into each of you and your knowledge of this conspiracy. Those uninvolved will help rebuild our company's reputation, those implicated will join Eleanor and Victor." Later, David found Harmon waiting in a conference room with his attorney. "Why?" David asked simply. "You could have escaped." Harmon's expression was complicated, anger mixed with resignation and perhaps a hint of relief. "You fired me for something I actually did," he admitted. "It destroyed my life, but it was justified. This," he gestured at the evidence files, "would have destroyed thousands of lives." David studied the man who had tried to ruin him just days before. "What happens now?" "I go to jail for a shorter time than I would have," Harmon replied with a shrug, "and you get to be the hero who saved Apex." Ironic, isn't it? As Harmon was led away, David felt the weight of the past week bearing down on him. He had uncovered a conspiracy far larger than he had imagined. A month after the arrests of Eleanor Wilson and Victor Hendricks, David stood outside store number 147, watching employees arrive for work. The morning sun glinted off the newly installed sign, the first Apex store to feature the company's rebranded logo. Inside, Employees gathered in the break room where a small podium had been set up. Many familiar faces looked back at David as he stepped to the microphone, some embarrassed, others curious, all attentive. "Good morning," David began. "Most of you know me as the CEO who went undercover and got accused of theft, but today I'm here as someone who learned valuable lessons from each of you." The room was silent, hanging on his every word. "When I decided to work undercover, I thought I would learn about operational inefficiencies and customer service gaps. Instead, I discovered something far more important. The heart of Apex Retail isn't in the corporate offices, it's right here on the sales floor, in the stock rooms, at the registers." David gestured to Ellen, who stood near the back of the room. "People like Ellen Johnson, who's dedicated 12 years to this company, taught me that loyalty isn't built through corporate memos or mission statements, it's built through respect, fair treatment, and genuine appreciation." He paused, looking around the room. "I also learned that our company had lost its way. The conspiracy to sell Apex revealed deep flaws in our corporate culture, a culture that valued profits over people, which allowed power to concentrate in the hands of a few who abused it." David took a deep breath before continuing. "Today marks a new chapter for Apex Retail. The board has unanimously approved a comprehensive reform package that I'd like to share with you before it's announced publicly." He outlined the changes: profit sharing for all employees, improved healthcare benefits, guaranteed minimum hours for part-time staff, and a path to advancement that didn't require a college degree. Each announcement brought murmurs of approval from the gathered workers. Additionally, every store will now have a direct line to corporate headquarters, bypassing regional management when necessary. No employee concern will go unheard, no suggestion will be dismissed without consideration. He turned to Ellen and finally said, "I also want to announce our new Regional Director of Employee Relations, Ellen Johnson." Gasps and applause filled the room as a shocked Ellen stepped forward. Ellen's dedication to this company saved not just my career but potentially thousands of jobs. Her new role will focus on rebuilding trust between corporate and retail employees and ensuring frontline worker perspectives inform every major decision. After the meeting, David walked the sales floor, stopping to chat with employees and customers alike. The store had been transformed, not just with new signage and displays, but with an energy that had been missing before. Near the exit, he encountered an unexpected figure, Theodore Harmon, accompanied by a police officer. "Part of my plea deal," Harmon explained, noting David's surprise. "Community service before sentencing, helping the investigation recover all the evidence." David studied the man who had tried to destroy him. "You know, in a strange way, I owe you thanks. Without your revenge plot, we might never have uncovered Eleanor's scheme." Harmon laughed bitterly. "Don't thank me. I still wanted to ruin you. I just found a line I wouldn't cross." "There's something admirable in that," David replied. "When you finish your sentence, there might be a place for you at the new Apex. Rehabilitation through employment." Harmon raised an eyebrow. "Bold move for a CEO." "Just something I learned while undercover," David said with a slight smile. "Sometimes people deserve second chances." As David left the store, his phone rang. It was June, calling about the national press conference scheduled for that afternoon. Apex's stock had rebounded beyond its previous high as investors responded to the company's transparency throughout the crisis. But for David, the true measure of success wasn't in the stock price or headlines. It was in the transformed store number 147, where employees now worked with purpose and pride. It was in Ellen's promotion, recognizing loyalty and courage. What had begun as a simple undercover mission had become something far more profound, a complete reinvention of a company, its culture, and its CEO. The conspiracy to destroy him had instead made David Carter and Apex Retail stronger than ever before.